Have you ever seen someone lie so confidently that the world believed them? Until 1 second exposed everything? The Dallas courtroom was packed, cameras pressed against the back wall, every seat filled. Natalie Ruiz sat at the front table, visibly pregnant, her hand clutching restraining order papers so tight the edges crumpled. Across the aisle, her millionaire husband Brandon Cole leaned back in his chair, bored, like this was just another Tuesday. Next to him sat Kelsey Hart, his mistress, perfectly styled in a tight dress, her red nails drumming on the armrest. Natalie's lawyer stood and began listing the evidence. Late-night threats, blocked bank accounts, a fall down the marble stairs in their Miami penthouse that sent Natalie to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. Natalie's hand drifted to her stomach as the lawyer spoke, her eyes locked on Brandon's casual arm draped behind Kelsey's chair, like she was the one who belonged to him. Then Kelsey exploded. She shot out of her seat, crossed the aisle in 4 sharp steps, and slammed her stiletto heel straight into Natalie's belly. The courtroom erupted. Kelsey screamed that the pregnancy was fake, that Natalie was a liar, that this whole thing was a setup for money. Brandon grabbed Kelsey's wrist and pulled her back just enough to look like a savior for the cameras. Have you ever watched a woman beg to be believed while people with money turned her pain into a show? In this room, the one with bruises was losing, and the one with lawyers was winning. Before this story ends, that balance will flip, but the cost will haunt everyone who steps into this courthouse. Watch to the end and tell in the comments whose side you're on. Because when one old bracelet catches the light, a judge's past collides with this case in a way no one saw coming. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. By the time her body hit the courtroom floor, Brandon already knew which camera angle would save him. Everything froze. Natalie's head cracked against the wooden bench leg. Kelsey stood over her, chest heaving, one heel still raised like she was ready to swing again. Brandon's hand wrapped around Kelsey's wrist, firm but not rough, positioning himself between her and the cameras like a shield. Judge Roland Pierce shot to his feet, breaking every protocol, and rushed down from the bench. Natalie's last thought before blacking out was how familiar Brandon's grip on Kelsey looked. That same hold. The way his palm rested at the back of her neck. The way he used to steady Natalie in crowded rooms. His fingers pressing just hard enough to remind her who was in control. Now he was using it on Kelsey, pulling her back with the exact pressure that said, "Trust me. I've got this." The bailiffs moved in. Someone shouted for paramedics. Brandon stepped back, hands raised, the picture of shock and concern. Kelsey crumpled into sobs, covering her face, while Brandon whispered something in her ear that made her nod. The whole room buzzed, phones out, recording every angle. Roland Pierce knelt beside Natalie, ignoring the bailiff telling him to step back. Her arm had twisted under her, and something silver slid from her sleeve onto the floor. A bracelet, old, worn, the clasp broken. Roland stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. His hand hovered over it, shaking. Then he looked at Natalie's face, her closed eyes, the bruise already forming on her temple. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Roland stood slowly, the bracelet clutched in his fist, his face drained of color. One of the lawyers asked if he was okay. He didn't answer. He just watched them lift Natalie onto the stretcher, her head lolling to the side, her hand still pressed to her stomach. As they wheeled her out, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, Brandon turned to his lawyer and smiled. Just a little, just enough. But Roland saw it, and something inside him snapped. The first time Natalie met Brandon, he didn't look dangerous. He looked like an escape with valet parking. She was working a hotel event in Miami, balancing trays of champagne in a tight black uniform, feet aching in cheap heels. The ballroom was filled with people who smelled like money. Expensive cologne, leather, fresh flowers. Natalie moved through the crowd, invisible, just another server. Then a man in a suit grabbed her wrist. Too tight, too long. He complained about the temperature of his drink, his breath hot and sour. Natalie apologized, tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Before she could say anything else, another hand appeared on the man's shoulder. Brandon Cole. Tall, sharp jaw, dark eyes that looked almost kind. He smiled at the man, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that said I could ruin you and enjoy it. The man let go of Natalie immediately and backed away, muttering an apology. Brandon turned to her, his voice soft. "You okay?" Natalie nodded, rubbing her wrist. He offered to walk her outside when her shift ended. She should have said no. But he looked at her like she was someone worth protecting, and it had been so long since anyone looked at her that way. They stood by his car, a sleek black thing that cost more than her rent for a year. He opened the door for her, asked where she lived, promised just a ride home. In the back seat, the leather was cool under her legs. Champagne sat in a small cooler between them. He poured her a glass, their fingers brushing over the armrest. He talked about the city, about how people never appreciated how beautiful it was from the right angle. His hand lingered over hers, warm, steady. When they reached her building, he didn't let go. He leaned in, slow, his breath smelling like mint and expensive whiskey, and kissed her. Her reflection caught in the elevator mirror as they pulled apart. Her lips parted, her cheeks flushed. That night, he texted her a photo. The Miami skyline from his balcony. Lights stretched out like stars. The message underneath read, "Your life should be this high up." She wrote back, smiling at her phone in her tiny apartment. She didn't know that years later, he'd used that same balcony to threaten her. He didn't just offer her a ring. He offered to erase every bill with one signature. 3 months later, Natalie's life had changed so fast she barely recognized it. Lavish dinners at restaurants where the menu had no prices. Designer dresses delivered to her door with handwritten notes. Brandon insisted she quit her job. "You don't need to work," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Focus on us. Focus on building a family." It sounded romantic, felt like relief. Her credit cards were maxed out, her student loans piling up, and here was a man offering to make all of it disappear. The prenup meeting happened in a glass office overlooking the ocean. Brandon's lawyer, a woman in a sharp gray suit, slid the papers across the table. Natalie tried to read them, but the words blurred together. Legal terms she didn't understand, clauses about assets and custody and mental stability. The lawyer's voice was fast, clinical, rushing through each section like it didn't matter. Brandon squeezed Natalie's hand under the table. "It's just a formality," he whispered. "Protects both of us. You trust me, don't you?" She did, or she wanted to, so she signed. That night, they celebrated in the penthouse. Candles lined the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glowing below them. Brandon pulled her close, his hands slow and careful, his mouth tracing her collarbone. She pressed against the glass, his body warm behind her, his breath hot on her neck. He whispered how much he loved her, how no one would ever take care of her the way he would, how she was finally safe. She believed his body language more than the legal language she'd skimmed. Weeks later, alone in the penthouse, Natalie pulled out the prenup again. She read it slowly this time, her stomach turning. Buried in the middle was a clause she'd missed. If she was ever deemed mentally unstable, custody of any children and control of all shared assets would shift entirely to him. Her hands shook as she put the papers back. The first bruise came with an apology so sweet it almost convinced her she hit herself. Started small. Natalie called her mother without telling Brandon first. He came home and asked who she'd been talking to. His voice light but his eyes sharp. When she said her mom, his face changed. He asked why she needed to call without telling him. If she was hiding something, if she thought he was controlling. "I just wanted to check in," Natalie said, stepping back. "Check in." Brandon moved closer. "You think I don't take care of you? You think you need to run to mommy every time something bothers you? That's not." He shoved her. Not hard, but enough to send her stumbling into the banister. Her hip cracked against the wood, sharp pain shooting down her leg. She gasped and Brandon froze. For a second, his face was blank. Then it crumpled. He dropped to his knees, crying, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I love you so much it scares me. The thought of losing you makes me crazy. Please forgive me." The next day, a jewelry box appeared on the kitchen counter. A diamond bracelet. A card that read, "You're my whole world." Her friends stopped calling as much. When they did, Brandon would hover nearby, listening, his jaw tight. If she made plans without asking him first, he'd get quiet, distant, until she canceled. Slowly, her world shrank to just him. Then came the make-up intimacy. After every fight, every shove, every bruise, he'd kiss the spot where it hurt. His mouth would trail over her skin, soft and slow, murmuring that no one would ever love her the way he did, that she was lucky to have someone who cared this much. Her body responded even when her mind screamed to pull away. Shame and desire tangled so tight, she couldn't tell them apart. One night, alone in the bathroom, Natalie stared at a positive pregnancy test. Her hands shook. In the living room, Brandon laughed loud on the phone with a friend, saying, "Women who trap men with kids are the worst, man. Oldest trick in the book." She hid the test in the bottom of the trash and didn't say a word. Carrying his child didn't make her safer. It just meant there was twice as much to threaten. Brandon changed the moment Natalie told him about the baby. His face softened, then hardened, like he was calculating something behind his eyes. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and said all the right things. But that night, he installed security cameras. "For safety," he said, pointing to the tiny black dome in the corner of the living room. "You're carrying my kid. I need to know you're okay when I'm not here." Cameras appeared in every room. The bedroom, the kitchen, even the hallway outside the bathroom. Natalie's phone started requiring a password she didn't set. Her bank account, the one with her name on it, got locked. Brandon said it was a joint decision to keep their money secure. When she asked for the password, he'd kiss her neck and say, "Why do you need it? I take care of everything." Her movements got tracked. He'd text her asking why she went to the grocery store at noon instead of morning. He'd call during doctor appointments, his voice tight, asking who she talked to in the waiting room. At night, he'd alternate between possessive tenderness and icy silence. Some nights, he'd pull her into bed, hands slow and careful on her growing stomach, murmuring about their future. Other nights, he wouldn't look at her at all. After appointments, he'd insist on celebrating. Champagne for him, sparkling water for her, candles on the table. Then he'd lead her to the bedroom, his touch framed as comfort, as connection. But Natalie felt more like proof of his power than a partner. His hands moved over her like he was checking inventory, making sure everything he owned was still in place. One afternoon, Natalie climbed the stairs carrying laundry. Her foot slipped on the top step. She grabbed the railing, heart pounding, barely catching herself. Brandon appeared at the bottom of the stairs, watching. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just stared, then turned and walked away. At her next appointment, the obstetrician asked routine questions. "Any falls? Any injuries?" Natalie hesitated, then said no. The doctor nodded, made notes, then quietly slipped a folded card into Natalie's hand while checking her blood pressure. A hotline number. A single sentence. "You don't have to do this alone." Natalie hid the card in her shoe, pulse racing. When she got home, Brandon was waiting by the door, phone in hand, smiling. "How was the appointment?" he asked. "Good," Natalie said, her heart pounding so hard she thought he could hear it. "Everything's good." She didn't plan to run. She planned to survive the next 48 hours. Brandon left on a Thursday for a short business trip. 2 days, maybe 3. He kissed Natalie goodbye, his hand lingering on her stomach, his eyes searching her face like he was looking for cracks. "Miss me," he said. It wasn't a request. The moment his car left the driveway, Natalie pulled the card from her shoe and dialed. The voice on the other end was calm, steady. A woman who'd heard stories like this before. She listened while Natalie talked fast, words tumbling out about the cameras, the locked accounts, the stairs. The woman gave her a number for a legal clinic in Dallas. Monica Fields. She told Natalie to collect evidence before she left. Photos, texts, anything that showed the pattern. Natalie spent the next 2 nights barely sleeping. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, phone in one hand, flash drive in the other. She photographed bruises that hadn't faded. She screenshot bank statements showing her locked accounts. She recorded a video of herself describing the fall on the stairs, her voice shaking but clear. At night, Brandon called. His voice was smooth, warm, the version of himself he used when he wanted something. "I miss you," he said. "Tell me you miss me." Natalie's body responded the way it had been trained to. Her voice went soft, breathy. "I miss you," she said, while her other hand slid bruised photos onto the flash drive. Her mind screamed to hang up, but her voice stayed steady, playing the role he needed her to play. On the second night, he sent her a video. A club, loud music, Kelsey Hart sitting on his lap, her mouth on his neck, her hand in his hair. The caption read, "Don't make me regret making you my wife." Natalie stared at the screen, her chest tight. She should have felt hurt, betrayed. Instead, she felt something colder. Clarity. She opened her laptop and booked a one-way ticket to Dallas. The flight left early Saturday morning. She packed one bag, clothes, the flash drive, the broken bracelet her mother gave her years ago. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand. As the plane lifted off, Natalie looked out the window at Miami shrinking below her, and for the first time in months, she could breathe. The first person who believed her story was a paralegal who looked tired enough to have heard it 100 times. The legal clinic in Dallas was small, tucked between a laundromat and a taco shop. Natalie walked in with her bag slung over her shoulder, her phone turned off, her hands shaking. A young woman at the front desk looked up, saw Natalie's face, and nodded like she already knew the story. Monica Fields met her in a back room. Monica was tall, sharp-eyed, with gray streaks in her hair and a voice that didn't waste words. She listened while Natalie talked, pulling out the flash drive, showing the photos, the texts, the video of Brandon with Kelsey. Monica didn't flinch. She just took notes, nodded, and asked questions that made Natalie feel heard instead of judged. "We're going to file for a restraining order," Monica said, "and we're going to request your case be assigned to Judge Roland Pierce. He's fair. He listens. If anyone's going to take this seriously, it's him." Natalie's cheeks heated when Monica asked about the pattern of behavior. She had to describe things she'd buried. How good Brandon could be when he wanted something. How his touch in bed felt like control wrapped in passion. How hard it was to leave when part of her still remembered the version of him that made her feel wanted. Monica's response was blunt. "Control can feel like passion until it turns lethal. What you're describing isn't love. It's ownership, and we're going to make sure a judge sees that." They worked for hours, filling out forms, organizing evidence, planning the hearing. By the time Natalie left, the sun was setting, painting the Dallas sky orange and pink. She stepped outside, finally feeling like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. Then she felt it. Eyes on her. Across the street, a dark sedan sat idling. The driver lowered a phone, the screen glowing, pointed directly at her. Natalie froze. The car pulled away slowly, disappearing around the corner. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Running won't help." Roland Pierce was famous for keeping emotion off his face, until one old photograph ruined that habit forever. The case file landed on Roland's desk late Friday afternoon. Another restraining order hearing. Domestic violence. Pregnant woman fleeing her husband. He'd seen dozens like it. He opened the file, scanned the details, then stopped. Natalie Ruiz. Born in El Paso. Mother's maiden name, Elena Cordero. Roland's hand froze on the paper. El Paso. That name. He read it again, slower this time, his pulse picking up. He flipped through the file, looking for details he shouldn't be looking for: hometown, age, family background. Everything pointed to a connection he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let himself remember. College. El Paso. He was 21, chasing a scholarship that would take him to law school, to a future bigger than the tiny apartment he shared with 3 roommates. Elena was 19, working 2 jobs, dreaming of nursing school. They met at a campus library. She smiled at him over a stack of books, and he was gone. They had 6 months together. 6 months of late-night study sessions that turned into long kisses in his dorm bed. 6 months of her laughing at his jokes, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. 6 months of promises that felt real until the scholarship letter came. She told him she was pregnant the same week he got accepted. He remembered the way her voice shook, the way her tears felt hot on his neck when he held her. He remembered the goodbye, her lying in his dorm bed, her hand gripping his shirt, begging him not to leave. He remembered kissing her one last time, tasting salt, feeling like his chest was caving in. Then he left. He told himself he'd come back. He told himself he'd send money, stay in touch, make it work. But law school swallowed him whole, and the guilt became easier to bury than to face. He never called, never wrote, never went back. Now, sitting in his chambers, Roland opened his wallet. Tucked behind his credit cards was a faded photograph. Him and Elena, years younger, her head on his shoulder, smiling. She wore a silver bracelet on her wrist, the clasp broken even then. He pulled the photo out, held it up to the light, and stared at the girl in the picture. She had the same eyes as the woman in the case file, Natalie Ruiz, his daughter. Roland set the photo on his desk, his hands shaking. This hearing wasn't just another case. It was the consequence he'd been running from his entire life, finally catching up. The first thing Natalie saw when she woke up wasn't the monitor. It was the man from the bench staring at her wrist like it held a confession. Her head pounded. The hospital room was too bright, too loud. Machines beeped. Voices echoed in the hallway. Natalie blinked, her vision blurry, trying to remember how she got here. The courtroom, Kelsey's heel, the floor rushing up. Then nothing. A man stood at the foot of her bed. Older, gray hair, lines around his eyes. He wore a badge on his belt, but his face didn't look official. It looked broken. "Who are you?" Natalie's voice came out rough, her throat dry. "Judge Roland Pierce," he said quietly. "I recused myself from your case. I'm here as a private citizen." Natalie's pulse spiked. A judge, in her hospital room. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ribs. A nurse appeared, gently adjusting her hospital gown strap, checking the 4. Natalie flushed with shame, remembering how Brandon used to trace that same skin. His fingers possessive, claiming. The nurse squeezed her shoulder, her touch warm and steady. "You're not alone in this," the nurse said softly, then stepped back. Roland moved closer, his eyes fixed on Natalie's wrist. The silver bracelet, the broken clasp. She'd worn it since she was a kid, her mother's gift. The one thing she brought with her from El Paso. "Where did you get that?" Roland asked, his voice rough. "My mother," Natalie said. "Why?" Roland reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, creased from years in a wallet. He held it out to her. Natalie took it with shaking hands. The photo showed a young man and a young woman, college-aged, her head on his shoulder, smiling. The woman wore the same bracelet on her wrist. Natalie stared at the woman's face. Younger but unmistakable. Her mother. "That's my mom," Natalie whispered. She looked up at Roland, her world tilting. "Who are you?" The only thing more dangerous than another man lying to her was the chance that he might be telling the truth. Natalie held the photograph with shaking hands, staring at her mother's young face. The bracelet, the same smile. The man in the picture looked different, younger, hopeful, but his eyes were the same as the judge standing in front of her. "You left her," Natalie said, her voice flat. "You left her pregnant." Roland nodded, his face pale. "I was 21. I had a scholarship. I told myself I'd come back, send money, stay in touch. But I didn't. I ran. And I never stopped running until I saw your name on that case file." Natalie's chest tightened. Another man with excuses. Another man who made promises and broke them. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to get out, to stop pretending he cared now when it was 30 years too late. But something in his voice stopped her. He wasn't making excuses. He was admitting the truth, raw and ugly, without trying to soften it. What was her favorite song? Natalie asked suddenly. Roland blinked. What? My mother. If you really knew her, what was her favorite song? Roland's eyes went distant, remembering. She hummed this old mariachi song all the time. Cielito lindo. She'd sing it when she was studying, when she was cooking. She said it reminded her of her grandmother. Natalie's breath caught. Her mother still hummed that song. Every morning while making coffee. What did she want to be? Natalie pressed. A nurse, Roland said quietly. She wanted to work in pediatrics. She loved kids. His voice broke. She would have been great at it. Natalie's eyes burned. Her mother had worked in a factory for 20 years instead, raising a daughter alone, never finishing school. Roland knelt close to her hospital bed, his voice rough. I can't change what I did. I can't give her back those years or give you a father who was there. But I can help you now. I can make sure Brandon doesn't do to you what I did to her. Take everything and leave you with nothing. The vulnerability in the room felt strange, charged. Not romantic, but intimate in a way that reminded Natalie how different real care felt from the fake version Brandon used to perform. Roland wasn't touching her to control her. He was kneeling because he was asking, not demanding. There's a DNA test, Natalie said slowly. We do it. We confirm. And if you're really my father, you help me fight Brandon. Off the record. Even if it ends your career. Roland didn't hesitate. Done. And you tell my mother the truth yourself. Natalie added, her voice hard. You face her. You apologize. You don't get to hide anymore. Roland closed his eyes, then nodded. Okay. Natalie leaned back against the pillow, exhausted. If you lie to me, if you disappear again, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. I won't, Roland said. I promise. We'll see, Natalie whispered. By sunrise, Natalie wasn't a victim anymore. She was a headline. Brandon's PR team moved fast. By the time Natalie woke up the next morning, edited footage was already playing on every major news channel. The video showed Natalie stumbling, Kelsey reaching out like she was trying to steady her, then pulling back when Natalie fell. The angle made it look like an accident, a misunderstanding, a dramatic moment blown out of proportion by a pregnant woman's emotions. Talking heads filled the screen, their voices smooth and professional. Sources close to Brandon Cole say Natalie Ruiz has a history of emotional instability. Friends of the couple describe a volatile relationship on both sides. Could this be a case of a woman using pregnancy to manipulate a wealthy man? Natalie watched from her hospital bed, her hands gripping the bed rail so hard her knuckles turned white. They were rewriting the story, erasing her bruises, turning her pain into entertainment. Then the flashbacks started. News packages spliced in footage from Brandon's yacht parties. Slow-motion clips of Natalie in a tight red dress at his side, his hand resting on her lower back. The images were sensual, glamorous, designed to make viewers think she enjoyed the life he gave her. Clickbait wrapped in concern. One commentator, a woman in a sharp blazer, leaned into the camera. Let's be honest. Natalie Ruiz knew exactly what she was getting into when she married a millionaire. Women like that seduce men like Brandon for the lifestyle, then cry victim when it doesn't work out. The screen showed a photo of Natalie at a charity gala. Diamonds around her neck, Brandon's arm wrapped around her waist. She looked happy. The camera didn't show the bruise hidden under her sleeve. It didn't show the way his fingers dug into her side just out of frame. It didn't show her going home that night and locking herself in the bathroom to cry. Natalie's vision blurred. She wanted to throw something, to scream, to make them see the truth. But all she could do was sit there and watch herself get torn apart on national television. Monica walked in, her face tight with anger. She turned off the TV without asking. They're lying, Monica said. We knew they would. Everyone believes them, Natalie whispered. Not everyone, Monica said. And we're going to make sure the people who matter, the judge, the jury, see the real story. Natalie took a shaky breath. Her whole body trembled. She thought about staying quiet, about disappearing, about letting Brandon win because fighting felt impossible. Then she thought about the other women, the ones who came before her, The ones who didn't get a chance to speak. She looked at Monica, her voice steady for the first time in days. I'm ready to talk. On record. I want to tell my side. Monica's eyes softened. You sure? Natalie nodded. He's going to drag me through the dirt either way. At least this way I get to fight back. Derek Shaw thought he'd left Brandon Cole behind years ago, until the news replayed a face he'd seen in an emergency room at 3 a.m. Derek was working a night shift at his apartment in Miami, half watching the news while eating leftover pizza, when Natalie's face filled the screen. The story about the courtroom attack, the millionaire husband, the restraining order. Derek froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He knew that face. Not Natalie's. Brandon's. 5 years ago, Derek had been working the ER at a hospital in Miami Beach. 3 in the morning. A woman came in with a broken wrist and bruises around her neck. She said she fell down the stairs. Her husband sat in the waiting room, calm, checking his phone. Brandon Cole. Derek remembered the woman's eyes. How they wouldn't meet his. How she flinched when he touched her arm to check her pulse. How her husband came into the room and suddenly her whole story changed. Yes, she was clumsy. Yes, she'd been drinking. Yes, everything was fine. 2 weeks later, that same woman supposedly jumped from her balcony. The police ruled it a suicide. Derek never believed it. He grabbed his phone and started searching. Brandon Cole. Miami. Ex-wives. The information was buried, but it was there if you knew where to look. 3 women. 3 accidents. 3 sealed reports. Derek found Monica's number through the news coverage and called. The phone rang twice before a sharp voice answered. Monica Fields. My name is Derek Shaw, he said. I'm a nurse in Miami. I saw your client on the news, and I need to tell you something about Brandon Cole. There was a pause. Then Monica's voice came back, focused. I'm listening. Derek told her everything. The woman in the ER. The suspicious fall. The sealed report. Monica asked quick, smart questions, the kind that made Derek feel like she was 3 steps ahead of him. They traded dry jokes about rich men and their fragile egos, a shared sense of fire crackling through the line. By the end of the call, Derek could tell Monica was the kind of person who burned hot in every arena, courtroom, conversation, probably everywhere else too. How many women? Monica asked finally. 3 that I know of, Derek said. 3 similar injuries. 3 sealed reports. And I'm willing to bet there are more. Monica was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm booking a flight to Miami. Can you meet me tomorrow? Yeah, Derek said. I'll bring everything I have. Good, Monica said. Because we're about to bury this man. Trevor Lane had made a career chasing rumors. This was the first one that made him check his locks twice. Trevor was a private investigator from Phoenix, the kind who worked cases lawyers didn't want to touch. He'd been following the Brandon Cole story since the courtroom video went viral, and something about it felt familiar. Too familiar. He dug through old files, cross-referenced names, and found it. 3 years ago, a woman in Phoenix had hired him to look into her sister's death. The sister had been married to a wealthy real estate developer. She died in a car accident that the police ruled as her losing control on a wet road. But the woman didn't buy it. Her sister was terrified of her husband, she said. She'd been planning to leave. Trevor investigated, found inconsistencies in the police report, but the case got shut down fast. Lawyers, money, sealed files. He never got justice for that woman. Now, looking at Brandon Cole's face on the news, Trevor saw the same pattern. Rich man, dead wife, convenient accident. He made some calls, found 2 more cases. Different states, different women, same story. He compiled everything into boxes, police reports, medical records, witness statements, and reached out to Monica Fields. They met in a quiet conference room in Dallas. Monica, Roland Pierce, and Trevor spread the files across the table. 3 ex-wives. 3 accidents. 3 sealed reports that someone had worked very hard to bury. This is a pattern, Monica said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We can use this. Roland looked sick. If even half of this is true. It's all true, Trevor said quietly. I've checked every detail twice. After the meeting, Trevor went to the hospital to meet Natalie. He walked into her room, his hair messy, his eyes tired, carrying a cup of water. He asked if she wanted the window open or closed. Small things, the kind of consideration Brandon never showed. When Trevor handed her the water, their fingers grazed. Both of them felt the jolt and quickly looked away. The air between them suddenly charged. "I have something you need to hear," Trevor said, pulling out his phone. He played an old voicemail, the audio crackling with static. A woman's voice, shaking, whispering. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. He said he'd make it look like I did it to myself. If you're hearing this, The recording cut off. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. "Who was that?" "Brandon's second wife," Trevor said quietly. "She died 3 months after leaving that message. Fell from a hotel balcony. Police called it suicide." Natalie stared at him, her whole body cold. "How many?" "3 that we can prove," Trevor said. "But I think there are more." Kelsey Hart knew how to play the perfect woman on Brandon's arm. She'd never rehearsed what to do when he turned that charm off. Kelsey sat in Brandon's Miami condo, staring at her phone, watching the news coverage spiral. Her face was everywhere. The woman who attacked a pregnant wife in open court. The mistress. The villain. Brandon paced behind her, his voice calm but his jaw tight. "You're going to tell them exactly what I said. You were trying to help Natalie." She stumbled. "You reached out. It was an accident." "Brandon, the video." "The video doesn't matter," he snapped. "What matters is what you say. Stick to the story." Kelsey nodded, her hands shaking. She'd been with Brandon for 8 months. Long enough to know what happened when he didn't get his way. Long enough to see the cracks in his perfect smile. He moved closer, gripping her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "Do you understand me?" "Yes," Kelsey whispered. His grip tightened, just a little too hard, his thumb pressing into her cheekbone. "Good girl." Then his mouth crashed onto hers, rough, demanding. The argument shifted into something physical, his hands pulling at her clothes, his body pressing her against the wall. It should have felt passionate. Instead, it felt mechanical, like he was using her to burn off frustration. Afterward, Kelsey stood in the bathroom, staring at her smeared lipstick in the mirror. Her jaw ached where he'd gripped it. Her body felt used, not wanted. She thought about Natalie, about the bruises, about the way Brandon talked about his ex-wife like she was a problem to solve instead of a person. Kelsey's phone buzzed. An anonymous account had uploaded a video. She clicked on it, her stomach sinking. Raw footage from the courtroom. No edits. No cuts. Just Kelsey crossing the aisle, her heels slamming into Natalie's stomach, Brandon pulling her back with a calculated smile. The comments underneath were brutal. "She's a monster. Lock her up. Hope she goes to prison." Kelsey scrolled down, her hands shaking, and saw another comment that made her blood run cold. "Brandon's PR team is already positioning her as the villain. He's going to let her take the fall." She looked up at the closed bathroom door, hearing Brandon on the phone in the other room, his voice smooth, charming, talking to his lawyer. He was already throwing her away. Kelsey sat on the edge of the tub, her whole body numb, and realized she'd become exactly what Natalie had been. A woman trapped by a man who knew how to make control feel like love until it was too late to escape. The only power Natalie had left was her story, and everyone wanted a piece of it. Monica arrived at the hospital with a folder full of offers. Media interviews, magazine exclusives, advocacy groups wanting Natalie to be their spokesperson, book deals, podcast invitations. Everyone wanted to hear her side, but they all wanted it packaged differently. "We could file a civil suit," Monica said, spreading papers across the hospital bed. "Go after his money, his properties, everything. But it means going fully public. Every detail of your marriage becomes evidence. Every intimate moment gets dragged across courtroom screens and news channels." Natalie stared at the papers, her stomach turning. The thought of strangers picking apart her life, analyzing every bruise, every fight, every night she spent trying to convince herself Brandon's version of love was normal. It felt like being stripped bare all over again. What if I stay quiet? Natalie asked. Then he wins, Monica said bluntly. He rebuilds his reputation. He finds another woman. And the cycle starts over. Natalie closed her eyes. She thought about the voicemail Trevor played. The woman whispering about accidents. The 3 ex-wives who never got to tell their stories. That night, Monica, Trevor, and Derek crowded into her hospital room with cheap takeout. Chinese food in white boxes, the smell of fried rice filling the small space. They talked strategy between bites, arguing over which approach would work best. But somewhere in the middle of it all, laughter bubbled up. Derek told a joke about a stubborn patient. Monica shot back with a dry comment about lawyers. Trevor smiled quietly, adding little details that made them all laugh harder. Natalie watched them, these 3 people who barely knew her but showed up anyway, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not fear, not shame, something lighter. She caught Trevor watching her, his eyes soft, his expression quiet and intense. Nothing like Brandon's flashy stare that demanded attention. Trevor looked at her like he was memorizing her face, learning the way she laughed, storing it somewhere safe. Their eyes met across the takeout boxes. Heat flooded Natalie's cheeks, and she looked away, her pulse racing. I'll testify, Natalie said suddenly. I'll go public. I'll tell everything. Monica stopped mid-bite. You sure? Natalie nodded. He took my money, my freedom, my safety. He doesn't get to take my voice too. Even if it means every intimate detail of my marriage gets dragged across screens, at least people will know the truth. Trevor reached across the bed and squeezed her hand once, quick and warm. We've got you. Natalie squeezed back, then pulled away before the moment stretched too long. But the warmth of his hand stayed with her long after he let go. Roland Pierce had built a career on distance. This was the first case that made his hands shake when he signed his name. The recusal paperwork sat on Roland's desk for 2 days before he signed it. Formally removing himself from Natalie's case meant admitting there was a personal connection. It meant opening himself up to questions, speculation, ethics complaints. But staying on the case while knowing she was his daughter would have been worse. He signed. His hand shook so badly the signature barely looked like his. Within hours, whispers started in the courthouse. A personal connection between Judge Pierce and the pregnant woman from the viral courtroom attack? Someone leaked the El Paso photo. Young Roland with his arm around a girl who looked just like Natalie, both of them smiling. The ethics board filed a complaint. They wanted to know how deep the connection went. Whether Roland had influenced the case assignment. Whether he'd shown favoritism. Whether his off-the-record support for Natalie compromised his position. Roland drove home that night in silence, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Disbarment, public disgrace, losing the career he'd built over 30 years because of a past he'd tried to bury. His wife, Margaret, was waiting in the kitchen when he walked in. She'd seen the photo. She'd seen the news coverage. Her face was tight with old jealousy, old hurt. You never told me about her, Margaret said quietly. I thought I could forget, Roland admitted. You left her pregnant. I did. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. And now she has a daughter. Your daughter. Yes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of half-truths and buried regrets. Margaret had known about the college girlfriend. Roland had mentioned her once early in their marriage, but he'd never told her the whole story. Never admitted he'd left someone pregnant. Never faced the weight of what he'd done. Are you going to help her? Margaret asked. I have to, Roland said. Even if it destroys me. Margaret stepped closer, her jaw tight, her eyes fierce. Then we do it together. We face it together. She pulled him into a rough hug, her arms tight around his shoulders. Roland buried his face in her hair, his body shaking. When she pulled back, she kissed him. Hard, angry, full of years of regrets finally spoken aloud. Don't you dare disappear on them, Margaret whispered against his mouth. Not again. I won't, Roland promised. The next morning, the ethics board called an emergency meeting. Roland's involvement in any off-the-record support for Natalie could end his career. But as he walked into that conference room, he realized some consequences were worth facing. The messages didn't say his name, but every line sounded like Brandon holding the phone. Natalie's new prepaid phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. She'd been asleep, dreaming about the courtroom, about Kelsey's heel, about falling. The buzz woke her, and she grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Unknown number. A text message with a photo attached. Her hospital window, taken from outside. The angle showed her room clearly, the curtains half open, the glow of the monitor visible through the glass. The message underneath read, "Accidents happen to careless mothers." Natalie's breath caught. She sat up, her heart pounding, and stared at the window. The curtains were closed now, but someone had been out there, watching, waiting. Another text came through. "You can't hide in there forever." Then another. "Think about the baby." Natalie's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She hit the call button for the nurse, her pulse racing, her stomach twisting. Security arrived within minutes, checked the hallways, reviewed footage. Nothing. Whoever sent the messages was already gone. Derek was working the night shift. When he heard what happened, he volunteered to stay in Natalie's room for the rest of his shift. He pulled a chair close to her bed, his presence steady and calm. "I'm not going anywhere," Derek said. Natalie tried to sleep, but every sound made her jump. The hum of the machines, the footsteps in the hallway, the rain starting to fall outside, drumming against the window. Thunder cracked, loud and sudden, rattling the glass. Natalie startled, her whole body tensing. Derek's hand moved instinctively, covering hers on the blanket. His grip was steady, warm, nothing like Brandon's possessive hold. This felt safe. "You're okay," Derek murmured. "I've got you." Natalie focused on the weight of his hand, the warmth of his palm, and slowly her breathing evened out. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. 3 in the morning, security called. They'd reviewed footage from the parking lot and found something. A man in a cap and mask had been standing near the building, phone raised toward Natalie's window. The angle was too far to see his face clearly, but one detail stood out. A watch. Expensive. Silver with a black face. Monica pulled up a photo from Brandon's social media. His head of security wore the same watch in every picture. Natalie stared at the image, her stomach sinking. Brandon wasn't just threatening her from a distance. He'd sent someone to her door. The lab envelope weighed almost nothing, but when Roland held it, it felt heavier than his robe. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Roland stared at the sealed envelope for a full 10 minutes before opening it. His hands shook. His breath came in short bursts. This piece of paper would confirm what he already knew in his gut, that Natalie was his daughter, that his past had finally caught up to him. He opened it alone in his chambers. The words blurred, then sharpened. 99% likelihood of paternity. He was her father. Roland sat down hard, the paper crumpling in his fist. 30 years of running, of pretending it didn't matter, of convincing himself he could build a new life without facing the old one. All of it came crashing down in that single sentence. He called Monica, then drove to the hospital. Natalie was sitting up in bed, her face pale but determined. Trevor and Monica flanked her, their expressions tense. Roland handed the paper to Natalie without a word. She read it slowly, her lips moving over the numbers, the technical language, the final line that said he was her biological father. Her face went blank. Then her eyes filled with tears. "So it's true," she whispered. "It's true," Roland said. Natalie swayed, overwhelmed, the weight of it hitting her all at once. Trevor moved fast, steadying her by the waist, his hands firm but gentle. Their breath mingled for a brief second as he held her upright, their faces close. Natalie's cheeks flushed, heat spreading through her chest from more than just shock. She stepped back, breaking the contact, her pulse racing. Trevor's hands lingered a moment longer before he let go, his eyes searching hers. Natalie turned back to Roland, her voice hard. "You tell my mother the truth, yourself, before the final hearing. You face her. You apologize on camera if that's what it takes for her to forgive you. Roland nodded. I will. And if you disappear again, Natalie said, her voice shaking, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. I won't disappear, Roland promised. Monica cleared her throat. We need to move fast. Brandon's team is already trying to discredit Natalie's story. If we're going to use this, your connection, the bracelet, your mother's testimony, we need it solid before the second hearing. Natalie looked at Roland, her eyes fierce. Then you better start driving. My mother lives in New Mexico, and she's been waiting 30 years to hear you say you're sorry. The woman he left on that El Paso sidewalk was no longer a crying girl. She was a mother with a memory like steel. Roland drove to New Mexico with the DNA results in his passenger seat and 30 years of guilt pressing on his chest. Elena Cordero lived in a small house on the edge of town. The yard neat, flowers blooming in pots on the porch. He knocked. She opened the door. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Elena's hair was streaked with gray now, her face lined, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, unforgiving. You have some nerve showing up here, Elena said. I know, Roland said, but Natalie asked me to come, and I owe you an explanation. Elena let him in, her movements stiff, her jaw tight. They sat in her living room, the air heavy with old hurt. Roland told her everything. The scholarship, the fear, the cowardice that made him leave instead of staying. The years of pretending it didn't matter, of burying the guilt until it surfaced in a courtroom when he saw Natalie's face and realized he couldn't run anymore. Elena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke, her voice cold. You left me with nothing. I had to drop out of school. I worked 2 jobs to raise her alone. You got to build your perfect life while I struggled to keep food on the table. I know, Roland said. I can't change that. I can't give you back those years. But I can help Natalie now. I can make sure Brandon doesn't destroy her the way I... His voice broke. The way I destroyed you. Elena's eyes flashed with anger. You didn't destroy me. You abandoned me. There's a difference. She stood, paced to the window, then turned back. There was a night years ago when you called. Late. You left a message apologizing. I almost called you back. I lay awake replaying being held in your dorm bed, remembering what it felt like when you said you loved me. The memory still burns my cheeks even now. Her voice hardened. But I didn't call back. Because you didn't deserve my forgiveness then, and I'm not sure you deserve it now. I don't, Roland admitted. But Natalie deserves a father who shows up. And she deserves justice against a man who's trying to take everything from her. Elena studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll testify, by video if they need me. I'll confirm the bracelet's history, back up Natalie's story, whatever it takes. But not for you. For her. That's all I'm asking, Roland said. Elena's held-back anger shifted, sharpening into something fierce. And when we're done burying Brandon Cole, you and I are going to have a long conversation about what kind of father you plan to be. Because if you hurt her again, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. I won't, Roland said. I promise. Elena's eyes stayed hard. We'll see. The same courtroom, the same benches. Only this time, the woman who'd crawled out on a stretcher walked in standing straight. Natalie stood outside the Dallas courthouse, her hand resting on her stomach, cameras flashing in her face. A new judge had been assigned, Judge Patricia Morales, known for her no-nonsense approach and her history of protecting victims. Monica stood to Natalie's left, briefcase in hand, her face set with determination. Derek and Trevor flanked her right, their presence solid and steady. The hallway flooded with reporters, cameramen, and people who'd been following the case online. Some held signs supporting Natalie. Others held signs supporting Brandon. The whole country had picked sides, and this hearing would decide which side won. Brandon arrived 30 minutes later, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He walked through the crowd like he owned the building, his smile confident, his posture relaxed. But Kelsey, walking 2 steps behind him, looked different. Thinner, pale. Her eyes darted around the hallway like she was looking for an escape route. Inside the courtroom, Natalie took her seat at the front table. Her hands shook slightly as she arranged her papers. Trevor leaned in close, his voice low and steady. If it gets too much, look at me, not at him. Their knees brushed under the table, a small, grounding point of contact. Natalie nodded, her pulse steadying. Judge Morales entered, her robe crisp, her expression unreadable. Everyone stood. The room fell silent. The judge sat, gestured for everyone else to sit, then reviewed the papers in front of her. This is a hearing for a permanent restraining order filed by Natalie Ruiz against Brandon Cole, Judge Morales said, her voice clear and firm. Before we begin with opening statements, I want to address something that came across my desk this morning. The room held its breath. Previously sealed files from 3 states, Florida, Arizona, and California, have been admitted into evidence, Judge Morales continued. These files detail allegations and investigations involving Mr. Cole and 3 former spouses. All 3 women are now deceased under circumstances that were ruled accidental or self-inflicted. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Brandon's lawyers immediately stood, objecting, arguing relevance, demanding the files be excluded. Judge Morales listened, her face impassive, then denied their motion. The pattern of behavior is relevant to this case, she said. The evidence will be heard. Brandon's confident smile finally cracked. Just a little, just enough for Natalie to see it. Across the aisle, Kelsey's face went white. She looked at Brandon, then at the judge, then at the door like she was calculating whether she could run before anyone stopped her. Monica leaned over to Natalie and whispered, "Now it gets real." Judge Morales looked up. Opening statements. Ms. Fields, you may begin. The women who couldn't be there still managed to fill the room. Monica stood, her voice steady and clear, laying out the case. 3 ex-wives. 3 suspicious deaths. 3 sealed police reports that someone had worked very hard to bury. Medical records showing injuries consistent with physical assault. Hospital visits with explanations that didn't match the wounds. Friends and family members who remembered bruises, fear, and whispered confessions. Derek took the stand first. He described treating a woman in the Miami emergency room 5 years ago. Broken wrist, bruises around her neck, terror in her eyes. Her husband sat in the waiting room, calm and collected. Brandon Cole. 2 weeks later, that woman fell from her balcony. The police called it suicide. Derek never believed it. Trevor followed. He presented boxes of files, police reports, witness statements, medical records. He walked the judge through each case methodically, showing the pattern. Wife number 1. Fell downstairs, died from head trauma. Wife number 2. Jumped from a balcony, no suicide note. Wife number 3. Car accident on a clear day, lost control on a straight road. Family members of those women sat in the gallery, crying quietly. One woman, the sister of Brandon's second wife, stood when asked and told the court that her sister had been planning to leave Brandon the week she died. She'd packed a bag. She'd called a lawyer. Then she was gone. During recess, Monica and Trevor argued strategy in a side room, their voices sharp with adrenaline. They stood inches from each other, tension crackling between them. Professional, but charged with something more. The argument melted into a quiet moment where they leaned against the same wall, shoulders touching, sharing one long breath before heading back in. When court resumed, Brandon's lawyer stood to dismiss the pattern as coincidence. 3 tragic accidents spread across a decade, he argued. My client was investigated in each case and cleared. This is nothing more than an attempt to smear a successful man's reputation. Judge Morales looked skeptical but allowed him to continue. Then, in the middle of his argument, phones started buzzing throughout the gallery. One person gasped, then another. People pulled out their phones, eyes wide, hands covering their mouths. An anonymous account had just uploaded the full, raw courtroom video of Kelsey's attack. No edits, no cuts, just the truth played frame by frame for the entire world to see. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence, confused. His assistant leaned over, showed him the phone. His face went pale. Judge Morales banged her gavel. Order. We will take a 15-minute recess while I review this new development. Natalie watched the video on Trevor's phone. Kelsey crossing the aisle, her heel slamming into Natalie's stomach. Brandon's calculated smile. His perfectly timed pullback that made him look like a hero instead of the man who'd orchestrated the whole thing. The comments section was exploding. Millions of views in minutes. The truth, finally, where everyone could see it. Brandon sat frozen at his table, his lawyers whispering frantically in his ear. Kelsey stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom, her face streaked with tears. For the first time, the entire country saw what Natalie felt in her ribs. Judge Morales played the video in open court. Full screen, full sound. The footage showed Kelsey's approach from 3 different angles. Phones from the gallery capturing what the official cameras missed. Her face twisted with rage. Her heel aimed deliberately. Brandon's hand on her wrist, pulling her back just enough to look concerned for the cameras while his eyes stayed cold and calculating. The footage also included a brief earlier moment that most people had missed the first time. Before the hearing started, Brandon brushing dust off Natalie's shoulder in a falsely tender way, his mouth near her ear, whispering something that made her flinch, his hand lingering on her collarbone, possessive, a warning wrapped in a gesture that looked like care. Watching it now, Natalie shivered with disgust. She remembered how her body used to lean into that touch, trained to respond to him even when her mind screamed danger. Seeing it from the outside made her stomach turn. Public opinion shifted in real time. Phones buzzed throughout the gallery. Comments flooded in. He planned the whole thing. She's telling the truth. Lock him up. The tide that had turned against Natalie after Brandon's PR campaign reversed completely. Judge Morales paused the video and looked at Brandon's legal team. Do you have anything to say about this footage? Brandon's lead lawyer stood, his confidence shaken. Your Honor, emotions were running high that day. My client was trying to protect. Save it, Judge Morales said. I want to hear from Ms. Hart. Bailiff, bring her back in. Kelsey returned to the courtroom, her makeup smeared, her hands shaking. She took the stand, and Monica approached. Ms. Hart, did Brandon Cole instruct you to attack Natalie Ruiz in this courtroom? Kelsey's eyes darted to Brandon. He stared back, his jaw tight, his expression a silent warning. Ms. Hart, Judge Morales said firmly. Answer the question. Kelsey broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed, her voice shaking. He told me to make a scene. He said if I could make her look unstable, make it look like she was lying about the pregnancy, his lawyers could use it. He promised he'd fix everything after. He said I just had to trust him. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morales banged her gavel, calling for order. He coached me on what to say, Kelsey continued through sobs. He told me exactly how to act. And then her voice broke. He already had a plan to make me the villain if it went wrong. I saw the video, the anonymous account. It was him. He was gonna let me go to prison while he walked away clean. Brandon's face went blank. His lawyers immediately moved to distance themselves, whispering urgently that they needed to confer with their client. Monica turned to the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Hart is willing to cooperate fully in exchange for protection and a separate deal with the prosecutor's office. Judge Morales nodded. Noted. We'll reconvene after lunch. Ms. Ruiz, are you prepared to testify? Natalie stood, her legs shaky but her voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. They could list her injuries on paper, but only she could explain what it's like when love turns into a weapon in your own bed. Natalie took the stand after lunch, her hand resting briefly on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, cameras from major networks positioned at the back. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Her side of the story, unfiltered, on the record. Monica started with easy questions. Background, how she met Brandon, the early days when everything felt like a dream come true. Then the questions got harder. When did you first realize something was wrong? Natalie's voice stayed steady. When I called my mother without telling him first, and he shoved me into the banister hard enough to bruise my hip. Then he cried and apologized and bought me jewelry the next day. That's when I realized the man I married wasn't the man I thought I knew. Did the violence escalate? Yes. He installed cameras in every room. He locked my bank accounts. He tracked my phone. When I got pregnant, it got worse. He told me accidents happen to careless mothers. He implied that if I tried to leave, I'd fall just like his other wives did. The gallery went silent. Every eye was on Natalie. Monica asked about the night on the stairs, about the threats, about the video he sent with Kelsey. Natalie answered each question slowly but firmly, her eyes sometimes flicking to Trevor or Derek when her voice trembled. Their presence grounded her, reminded her she wasn't alone. Then Monica asked the hardest question. Ms. Ruiz, can you describe for the court what it was like living with Brandon Cole during your marriage? Natalie took a breath. She chose her words carefully, describing one night in simple but vivid emotional terms. How he touched her like an owner claiming property, not a partner sharing closeness. How intimacy became something she endured rather than wanted. How he used her body to reinforce his control, making her feel like she had no right to say no, no space to pull away, no voice that mattered. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear breathing. He made me believe that was love, Natalie said, her voice breaking. That if I just tried harder, if I just stopped making him angry, it would go back to the way it was in the beginning. But it never did. It only got worse. Brandon's lawyer cross-examined, trying to poke holes in her story, but Natalie held firm. She didn't waver. She didn't break. When she stepped down, she felt a sharp pain in her side. Her hand flew to her stomach, her face going pale. The courtroom held its breath. Medics rushed forward, checking her pulse, her blood pressure, listening for the baby's heartbeat. A long, tense moment passed. Then the lead medic looked at Judge Morales and gave a small nod. Both mother and baby are stable. The collective exhale in the courtroom sounded like a wave breaking. Natalie returned to her seat, Trevor's hand steady on her shoulder, and waited for the judge's decision. The only sound louder than the gavel was the collective exhale of everyone who'd ever been scared to speak. Judge Morales reviewed the evidence for what felt like hours but was only 20 minutes. The courtroom sat in tense silence. Natalie's hands were clasped so tight her knuckles turned white. Trevor sat beside her, his knee pressed against hers under the table, a silent reminder that he was there. Finally, Judge Morales looked up. I have reviewed the testimony, the medical records, the police reports, and the video evidence presented today, she began. The pattern of behavior demonstrated by Mr. Cole is clear, consistent, and deeply disturbing. Ms. Ruiz's testimony is credible and corroborated by multiple independent sources. Brandon sat perfectly still, his face blank. The permanent restraining order is granted, Judge Morales said. Mr. Cole is ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Ruiz at all times. He is prohibited from contacting her directly or indirectly through any means. He is prohibited from owning or possessing firearms. Custody of the unborn child will be determined in family court, with full consideration given to the evidence presented here. She paused, then continued. Additionally, based on the evidence of witness tampering, obstruction, and the credible threat to Ms. Ruiz's safety, I am remanding Mr. Cole into custody without bail pending criminal charges filed by the district attorney's office. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Family members of Brandon's ex-wives sobbed with relief. Bailiffs moved toward Brandon, who finally lost his composure, standing and shouting objections that were drowned out by the chaos. Kelsey was led away under a separate deal, her face hidden behind her hands. Outside, the media roared. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Monica, Derek, Trevor, and Natalie stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the wind whipping around them. Trevor slipped his jacket over Natalie's shoulders against the cold, his fingers brushing her collarbone. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A promise of something not built on fear, not rushed, but real. Nearby, Monica and Derek shared a quick hug that lingered a little longer than necessary. Battle partners who knew there was more between them than case files. A reporter shouted, Ms. Ruiz, what's your relationship with Judge Pierce? Is it true he's your biological father? Natalie looked at Roland, who stood respectfully to the side, not trying to claim credit or attention. She turned back to the microphones. That story is ours, not his, she said clearly. But one day, I'll tell it on my own terms. The cameras flashed. The questions continued. But Natalie had said her piece. She'd won. And for the first time in years, she could breathe. She came back to the courthouse with a stroller instead of a folder. 1 year later, Natalie stood at the top of the same Dallas courthouse steps. But everything was different. The stroller beside her held a 6-month-old baby girl with dark hair and curious eyes. The same silver bracelet, now repaired, hung on Natalie's wrist, and her daughter's tiny hand wrapped around the clasp, playing with the silver links. A small crowd had gathered for the press conference. Natalie was launching a foundation fund for survivors who needed legal help crossing state lines to escape their abusers. Monica helped with the legal structure. Derek connected her with medical advocates. Trevor handled security and logistics. Roland stood off to the side, a quiet, steady presence in her life now, not center stage. They'd spent the year rebuilding their relationship slowly. Sunday dinners, phone calls, him showing up when she needed help but not demanding more than she was ready to give. He'd earned a place in her life, not through words, but through showing up consistently. Natalie spoke into the microphones, her voice strong. She talked about the women who didn't make it out, the ones whose stories ended in sealed files and suspicious accidents. She talked about the importance of legal access, safe housing, and believing survivors when they speak. When she finished, the crowd applauded. Reporters asked questions. Cameras captured the moment. But Natalie's eyes drifted to the bottom of the courthouse stairs, where Trevor waited. She walked down slowly, the sun warming her skin, her baby cooing softly in the stroller. Trevor met her halfway, his hand reaching for hers. Their fingers intertwined, and his thumb traced the back of her hand in a simple, intimate motion that said the story wouldn't end in a courtroom. "Ready?" Trevor asked softly. "Yeah," Natalie said, smiling. "I'm ready." They walked away from the courthouse together, not looking back, the future opening up in front of them like a road with no end in sight. Voiceover close, Natalie's voice soft but clear. "He once told me no one would ever believe me. Turns out he was half right. Not everyone believed me. Just enough people did." The end. Thank you, family, for watching this video to the end. Comment your location of viewing, family, and like this video if you believe survivors. Comment whose story convinced you. Share with anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet.